This edition of Monocle on Saturday was first broadcast on the 15th of November 2025. Hello there, it's Emma Nelson here, coming to you live from Midori House in London. This is Monocle on Saturday. Welcome. Coming up, we have a look through the week's news and culture with the founder of China Dialogue, Isabel Hilton. Good morning, Isabel. You're happy. It's freezing.
I'm very happy. I'm from the north of Scotland. I love this weather.
I've never seen a woman look more blissful. We'll be looking at what else she's been spotting in the papers, though, in a little while. Then...
Charleston gave us conversations about race, history, memory and identity, and then sent us out into the streets that hold all these things in their walls.
Georgina Godwin sends us a dispatch from her travels and will be joined in the studio by the event director of St Andrew's Book Festival. That's all coming up on Monocle on Saturday. First, so, the headlines. Leaders are gathering in South Africa ahead of the G20 summit in Johannesburg. But the United States, which is due to take over the rotating presidency, has said it will boycott the meeting. Donald Trump says a deadline of next Thursday is appropriate for Ukraine to decide whether or not it will accept his plan to end a war with Russia. President Volodymyr Zelensky says the pressure on his country to agree to the deal is intense and could mean a choice between losing its dignity or losing a key partner, referring to the United States. The British government is expected to approve China's plans for a new mega embassy near to the Tower of London. The final decision hasn't yet formally been made, but it's understood British intelligence agencies have given ministers advice that clears the path for the controversial project. And scientists claim they have discovered the reason why there were thousands of small earthquakes near the Greek island of Santorini earlier this year. They found that swarms of tremors were caused by molten rock being pumped through an underground channel for 3 months. Tourists fled from Santorini after the activity began. And those are the headlines. Santorini seems like a really long way away today here in London. Isabel Hilton, international journalist and founder of China Dialogue. The Greek island and the heat of summer are a long, long way away now. The United Kingdom has been plunged into freezing temperatures. But if there was any argument to say that the human being has a seasonality element to it, I've never seen a woman look so happy in all my life. Everyone else is downright miserable. Isabel Hilton, Scottish through and through, the jeans triumph, and you're even going cold water swimming tomorrow.
Tomorrow, yes. It's much more fun when you have to break the ice. Yeah.
Yes. Why is it so good?
I honestly don't know, but somehow it's an absolute endorphin rush. It makes you ridiculously cheerful. I think it's probably, gosh, I survived that. Hooray, you know.
And the idea that it's not just been cold here in the United Kingdom. It's been miserable. We've been locked in that Tupperware box, which British people seem to be subject to between the months of November and April, and yet all the things that we sort of make other human beings miserable seem to fill you with joy. I think you she giggled, ladies and gentlemen, before we started when she mentioned the word drizzle. It was just happiness.
Well, we have a better word. It's called dreich.
Right.
Look out of the window and it's that kind of grey, wet, unrelenting gloom. You say, dreich day.
And do you have any more weather-specific language here? Because this is obviously we can go on for a while.
Yeah, well, quite a few. We're not quite up to the Inuit who allegedly have 20 different words for snow, but we do have quite a few. Do you know what spindrift is?
I'm just about to find out.
It's that very fine snow that blows off the top of the snowdrift and gets in the cracks. I woke up one morning in my bedroom in Arfert in Aberdeenshire, and there was little snowdrifts across the carpet because the spindrift had blown in the night.
You had an open window? No.
No, it's very fine and it gets through, old windows. They're not very well sealed and it had blown through.
And it had not melted on the carpet?
No.
Right, okay. Take a hot water bottle if you're going to Isabel Hilton's house in Aberdeenshire. Isabel, apart from being gleeful at this gloriously dreadful change in weather, what have you been up to this week?
Oh gosh, we've been talking geopolitics. I have to say, if you can't be cheerful about the weather, there's not much else to be cheerful about looking around the world. We've got the climate conference on the brink of collapse in Berlin. We have Donald Trump surrendering to Vladimir Putin and calling it a peace deal for Ukraine. There's a lot of Russian activity around British waters, actually, and a lot of Russian sabotage in Europe. And the British government, in between dithering over how not to spend the money we don't have in the upcoming budget, is also trying to avoid yet another row with China over whether or not to approve a very large embassy project in London. So it's been a kind of difficult week.
It has been a kind of difficult week when the realities of geopolitics
They're grim.
have gripped us all.
Absolutely grim.
That values-based multilateral international way of thinking seems to be something which sort of has crumbled quite easily in almost every step.
Well, I think when the main, the country that drove so much of the post-war construction of that values-based system goes rogue, as the United States under Donald Trump has, it's very difficult for smaller powers to sustain it, because as we've seen, the United States is quite prepared to use its economic and coercive power to get other people into line. And the sight of a Saudi prince who dismembered a Washington Post journalist, or had him dismembered, being greeted like a trusted friend by the President of the United States, is, it's becoming normalised, but it is still quite shocking to see the collapse of values.
I do apologise, a glass of water's gone down the wrong way. Gratefully, marvellously, I have Isabel Hilton, who's going to do a lot of talking for the next 5 minutes. I might nip out of the studio. Isabel, if you could carry on.
Because you come back.
I'll try to. The peace plan that you mentioned, this idea that the capitulation of Ukraine is going to be key to this plan, and that Volodymyr Zelensky last night said we either lose our dignity or we lose our ally.
Yes, well, I think there's more to lose than dignity with respect to President Zelensky. I mean, I thought we learned in Munich that appeasing aggressive dictators tended to lead to more trouble, and in that case to World War II. This so-called peace plan leaves Ukraine. Not only does it give Russia more than Russia has actually won on the battlefield, it leaves Ukraine defenceless. It demands that they cut their armed forces. It rules out the presence of foreign forces, so there is no guarantee against further assaults by Russia. And frankly, if you give time to Putin to build back his economy and his forces, nobody's safe. Poland's not safe. The Balts aren't safe. Lithuania isn't safe. And frankly, it's just a green light to Putin's project to reconstruct the Soviet Empire by force. I can't think that this is in the United States' interest any more than it's in Europe's interest, because this is setting the scene for a permanent state of war in Europe, and that's not good for anybody.
Why do you think that Trump has set this deadline? Because he talked about Thursday being an appropriate time to get it all done. And one wonders whether there's a sense of theatre, an idea that an achievement has to be made by Donald Trump before, let's say, Christmas or the end of the year.
Or indeed on Thanksgiving, which is what that date is. And yes, I mean, Donald Trump's sense of theatre, it seems to be setting the pace for all manner of things. And without suggesting that the President of the United States was ever up to anything nefarious, the row around the Epstein files does create a need for a diversion. So we've had Marjorie Taylor Greene, one of his most fervent supporters, a woman quite capable of a degree of unpleasantness that even Donald Trump might balk at, has resigned with a 10-minute denunciation, in effect, of Donald Trump as a traitor and someone who only serves his own interests and the interests of foreign powers. That's pretty strong stuff. So he needed something. We all know that he wants the Nobel Peace Prize. So to force Ukraine to capitulate and call it peace might, give him the illusion that he is going to finally cross that hurdle. I don't think any of this is going to work. I think it would be so difficult for Zelensky to accept, and I don't think Ukrainians would accept, and Europeans would certainly be very, very concerned. But finding a way through it when Washington is being obdurate is going to be very tough.
The initial reaction from Ukrainians on the street yesterday, by all accounts, was do not do this. The Americans have a very hard line on this one, though, and I think there's an article, I think that there's a comment coming out of Washington at the moment that the Americans say that, the US armed forces love Ukraine, they stand by Ukraine, but the honest US military assessment is that Ukraine is in a bad position and it now is the best time for peace. Are the Americans saying something which is actually the unsaid, which is Ukraine can't win this unless it has to capitulate and has to accept that this is not going to be the way? It is a horrible, horrible truth that were it to be correct.
Well, it isn't great on the battlefield at the moment, but as others have pointed out, collectively the economies and armed forces of Europe and the United States outnumber Russia by, orders of magnitude. So it is an extraordinary proposition that a virtually bankrupt petrostate, which is having to draft in mercenaries from all over the world by deceit or by promises of money, is the inevitable victor in this war. It's just not the case. So what this is signalling is an unwillingness of the United States to continue its support. And whilst it's true that it's the European Union that's actually paying for this war now, buying American weapons, because Trump, for all he said, isn't actually putting any money in, but they are putting some valuable resources in. So in particular, if it's the satellites, it's the intelligence, it's even, Elon Musk's Starlink service, which was critical at certain moments in the war. So there are assets that the United States has, which actually we've all shared in NATO, and the US is now threatening to withdraw. So that is serious. But it is absolutely not inevitable that Ukraine needs to capitulate, and certainly not to this degree. And remember, Zelensky practically gave away concessions on strategic minerals to the United States under the illusion that this would form some kind of guarantee of continued US commitment, and it turned out to be another shakedown. So we are really kind of plunging new depths here.
Okay, we will follow that obviously very, very closely. The deadline for that is Thursday. What do you want to say about this embassy? So for about 6 or 7 months now, bubbling along has been plans for the Chinese to build I think it's being described as a mega embassy in the centre of London, not very far from the Tower of London. So historic, symbolic, powerful place to build an embassy. Not just that, there have been all manners of rumours about parts of the plans being redacted with allegations that people will be held against their will, or all manner of nefarious things could be going on underneath. And also the fact that these construction sites are very, very close to some quite important cables in London. And quite a big fuss has been kicked up about it, hasn't it, Isabel?
A most enormous fuss. And I think bumbling is probably the better adjective in this case, because this decision has dragged on. Initially, the permission was given by the Conservative government, and then it was held up. And when the Labour government came in, the Chinese put some pressure on the Labour government to get on with it. It's a historic site. It's the site of the former Royal Mint, which has been effectively disused since the last gold sovereign was struck there in the 1970s. And it does need a purpose. Now, the things that are said about this site are said by a range of people, from some politicians who don't want any contact with China or anything to do with China, Hong Kong exiles who are quite legitimately concerned about their own security, because certainly China is after many of them and has put bounties on their heads. And then there's a security question, as you say, of whether the data which carry information to and from the City of London, financial data largely, could be tapped. Now, if you look at these claims, it is vanishingly unlikely that the Chinese would kidnap and torture people in the basement of their embassy. It would be so stupid, frankly, and unlikely to happen without discovery. Because what do you do after you've tortured someone? Do you keep them there forever? Do you somehow try and put them back? What do you do? And how do you keep that secret? So I think if they were ever to do that, they wouldn't do it at the embassy. They do it off-site. Why do they want such a large embassy? Well, unlike a lot of diplomatic services, for reasons of their own, the Chinese have all their staff as Chinese. So that includes the cleaners, the cooks, the bottle washers, and that's a lot of people. At the moment, they're scattered all over London and they want them in one place. So that's not a sinister reason. That's actually quite practical. As far as the cables go, I have to take my cue from the British intelligence service and security services, who seem relatively relaxed about that. It's quite true that the UK faces all manner of cyber threats from China, but we know where the cables are. We either reroute them or we figure out technical ways to protect them. And that seems to be the view that the security services are taking. So apart from the kind of symbolic importance of saying yes to China, which some people just object to on principle, there doesn't seem to be much of a threat. And the threat of saying no is having a fight that we don't really need to have. And then our embassy in Beijing, which is quite small and very much in need of an upgrade, would never happen. We would just be condemned to overcrowding and not being able to modernise.
So the British wouldn't get an enormous embassy in Beijing in return?
I don't think they want an enormous embassy in Beijing, but they do want to be able to upgrade their facilities. Yeah.
Symbolically, that is a very important thing, that the fact that the Chinese embassy wishes to be so big, not just so it can house the cooks and the cleaners and bottle washers, but to actually have such a huge presence centrally in London. What kind of message does that send about the way the United Kingdom deals with China?
Well, I think that that if you were Chinese, you would be looking at the size of the American embassy in London, which is also pretty large, and you'd probably be wanting to match it. So certainly it suits the projection of China's global image, that it's in a large historical site right in the centre of London. As far as again, this decision was made by a whole series of people who then vanished off the stage, and it's a parcel that's been handed on without anyone particularly wanting to unwrap it. And now we've got to the point where the music stops and we have to make a decision. So at this point, sorry. As the Irish would say,
as well.
As the Irish would say, I wouldn't start from here, but this is where we are, and it's time to cut our losses.
Actually, speaking of the Irish, I wouldn't start from here. There's an article in the South China Morning Post who I wanted to draw your attention to, which is the Ireland Business Chamber is welcoming Chinese investment despite the US-EU pressures. The Dublin Chamber of Commerce CEO is saying that he is welcoming business ties within EU rules. It appears that Chinese investment is now being actively welcomed in Ireland.
Well, the Irish economy does need a bit of a boost at the moment, and the thing that Ireland has been noted for in recent years is being a kind of a hub of electronics and cyber capacities. So that's exactly the area that China would be interested in.
But this is now working though within the European Union, and
yes,
and we have seen the problems earlier this week with the Germans now having to say we need a proper approach to the amount of dependence that the German economy has on China.
The German case is a little different because it was Europe's major industrial economy, particularly with the car industry. And frankly, it's having its Kodak moment because it's been completely outflanked by Chinese electric vehicles. And so the question there is, how do you protect an industrial economy from what is in fact a predatory undermining, because there's so much subsidy in the Chinese economy. We've seen this repeatedly. We saw it in telephony with Huawei, for example, which knocked competition out of business because they were just undercutting in terms of public contracts and public bidding. We saw it in solar panels. Same thing happened. We're beginning to see it in wind turbines and in motor vehicles. That's particularly hit Germany. So they really want protection. They had a countervailing benefit, which was access to the Chinese market for internal combustion engines, and they're losing that. So very belatedly, Germany has woken up to the position that it's got itself into and is trying, as I say, very belatedly to put in protective measures. None of that applies in Ireland. They didn't have that kind of industrial economy to protect. So it's a slightly different position. They're more, if you like Hungary, which is enthusiastic about Chinese investment to the point where they're welcoming the building of battery factories, for example, within the European Union to get around any kind of tariff hurdles that Europe might put in place.
Isabel, stay with us. We're going to be joined in a moment by Susan Pym, who's from the St Andrews Literature Festival. I'm going to be talking about books. Speaking of which, I'm not the right person to talk about books, but we do have someone on Monocle Radio who is. Georgina Godwin. She's off on her travels at the minute. She's doing literary festivals in Charleston and Miami. And she sent us this.
The Charleston Literary Festival wrapped up last weekend, and I'm still slightly bewitched. The whole thing moved at that wonderful South Carolina unhurried pace. You nip out for a coffee and somehow end up in a miniature history seminar. You go to a panel and later find yourself on a porch discussing oysters with a Booker winner. Dressing up for a Great Gatsby party with live jazz, wild dancing and cocktails. Writers, readers, locals, all happily mixing together, none of us ever pretending we were heading to bed early. Evenings spent in historic homes with writers from all over the world, and days strolling along the sea wall where Oscar Wilde once walked. Talks took place on the site of the oldest purpose-built theatre in the United States, in this place where the Civil War began. What I loved most, though, was the mix of it all. Charleston gave us conversations about race, history, memory and identity, and then sent us out into the streets that hold all these things in their walls. It was intimate and ambitious simultaneously. And by the time you hear this, I'll be in Florida for the Miami Book Fair, which is one of the biggest literary festivals in the United States. A very different vibe. Palm trees, big crowds, the occasional novelist in sunglasses even indoors, but the same spirit of people coming together because stories still matter. Charleston was all charm and depth. Miami will be all heat and scale. I feel very lucky to be caught between the two and to record it all for you so you can hear from many of the authors I encounter on Meet the Writers.
That was Georgina Godwin, clearly having a fabulous time in the United States. She's back next week, though, so she'll have bounced from Miami back to the freezing temperatures here in London. Georgina, we look forward to seeing you again. Let's talk about book festivals. I am completely the wrong person, but don't worry, I can read. We've got the second St Andrews Literature Festival being hosted here in London from the 25th of November. I am delighted to say that bringing in a box, not a small box, but as if we're going to move house box, full of books, is the festival's event director, Susan Pym. Good morning, Susan. Welcome to Monocle Radio. Tell us about this festival and why you're hosting it in London.
Well, that's a very good question. There's an organisation called Scots in London, which formed back in, I think, 2018. And it was really bringing together all the Scottish organisations which are based in London, whether that's the two Scottish churches, the London Scottish Regiment, the London Scottish Football Club, the Caledonian Club, etc. And they got together because they wanted to commemorate the centenary of the armistice and how might they all do that together. That was very successful. They organised a few other events and my husband and I were both involved. But we also helped with the Queen's Park Book Festival in North West London. So we had this idea, why don't we have a Scottish book festival, but have it in London and bring world-class famous authors to London, but also debut authors. So they're on the same platform, but it's giving them exposure in London, not just to the huge Scottish diaspora, but to anyone who enjoys good books, good literature, Scottish writing, Scottish themes, Scottish connections.
Okay, so let's try and sort of define Scottish literature, Scottish themes, Scottish connections. How strong a voice does this play out through the festival?
I would say it's strong. It certainly attracts big names. So, for example, last year, which was our first year, we had Sir Ian Rankin, Sir Alexander McCall-Smith, Judy Murray, people like that, who immediately said, I really want to be part of this. And I think one of the reasons is that actually Scottish authors, they don't really get together that often. You know, they're travelling the world publicising their books, but they might not really know anyone in a city where there's a festival. Whereas when they come to us, they're all together. So there was a real party atmosphere. I just, vividly remember all these authors last year saying to me, this is so much fun. To bring us all together, in one place is a really fun thing to do.
Now, Isabel, you judge, organise book festivals. You are Scottish. Over to you. This is clearly something that. How happy are you that Scotland is coming to London in a literary sense?
I'm always happy when Scotland comes to London, and I'm always happy to see books celebrated. But in fact, I don't organise book festivals, but I have taken part in judging book prizes, and I'm still doing that. I judged the Baillie. I chaired the Baillie Gifford judges. The one before last, and I'm currently chairing the Asia Society of New York's Chinese Non-Fiction Prize. So there's a lot of group reading in my life, and quite a lot of book festivals. In fact, I've done the Edinburgh one quite regularly. So it's not that Scotland is without book festivals. Almost every town in some way has a book festival. But this is, the idea of a book festival, a Scottish book festival in London is really quite appealing. I would certainly go to the party.
Thank you.
I bet I'm coming too. I haven't been invited. I don't care. I'm coming. So Scottish literature has been brought to London, and you have done an even more sterling job. You've brought Scottish literature into the studio.
I just thought you might like to see some of our authors and just to get a flavour really for the genres and the diversity.
So talk us through the books.
Well, we kick off. On Wednesday night, we have a book launch for 2 debut authors, and that's being held at Scotland House. I don't know if you know it. Scotland House is the home of the Scottish Government in London. It's at Blackfriars. Absolutely fantastic building. They are the most hospitable people, and they really support us. So they're hosting our debut authors, which is fantastic exposure for 2 new authors just sort of starting off. I remember speaking to Ian Rankin about this, and he said it took him 7 novels before he made his name. 7 novels before anyone was really interested in talking to him. So it's very deeply important to me to bring debut authors to London and to give them that kind of platform.
Who have we got then?
So we've got them, and then the following night we kick off with Nicola Sturgeon with her memoir. So we are doing memoirs. Nicola is our first sort of big name.
Is it just Christmas coming?
We have, honestly, if you want to buy your Christmas presents, the bookshop at our book festival is the place to be.
Absolutely.
So we've got Nicola, and she is on with Aisha Hazarika, who I know will be a fantastic interviewer, Baroness, Labour peer.
Have you read it yet?
I've dipped into it.
And if you've got a lot of time on your hands, the size of that book will fill it. She clearly has an awful lot to say.
She has a lot to say.
She has quite a lot that's unsaid too, I think.
Yeah, and I think it'll be interesting to hear what questions she's asked on the night. That's our biggest audience at the moment. She's been our bestseller from day one. So there's a London audience for Nicola Sturgeon, for sure.
Nicola's actually, she's a literary person herself, apart from the book. She has done, I've seen her moderating panels at the Edinburgh Book Festival. Even when she was First Minister, she did that. So she's definitely someone who has books very much in her life.
She's a passionate reader. Yeah. She's incredibly well read. And she really supports book festivals. So she was, very willing to come and attend, and that was very exciting for us to get her in as our first name. Following her, that same evening, so that's this Thursday night, we also have Val McDermid with her book, which is from the Karen Perry series, Val McDermid, Queen of Crime, Silent Bones, which is her latest book. She's also got a book out about winter in Scotland. Sandwiched between the two of them, we have a rugby event. This is my big coffee table book. It's actually absolutely beautiful. It's for anyone who loves rugby. It's called This is Murrayfield. Murrayfield, the hallowed ground, is celebrating its 100th birthday. And that particular book brings in Rory Lawson, who used to play for Scotland, and the writers Peter Burns and Rob Robertson.
Susan, unfortunately, time has run out on us. I'm so sorry, because there are still more books in the box.
Lots.
There's a lot of books. The St Andrews Book Festival is starting 25th to the 30th of November. How do we find out about this? And if you had one book, one author that you wanted us to all rush out and buy this afternoon, who would it be? So give us the logistics first.
I'll give you the logistics first. So just go to our website, which is www.standrewsbookfestival.org. It's St Andrews ST rather than Saint. So standrewsbookfestival.org. That's got all the information, takes you straight through to Ticket Source for all the tickets. We're in central London. The main venue is St Columba's Church of Scotland, which is in Knightsbridge in Pont Street. It's got a big Scottish flag flying. It's very easy to spot. So we'll be there, and we have umpteen events. I think there's something like 37. I could say that in terms of fiction or crime fiction, I would pick out Denise Mina and Jenny Colgan if you just want to curl up with a really lovely, cosy read on your sofa. So some lovely fiction events. My personal favourite is How to Kill a Witch, A Guide for the Patriarchy by Claire Mitchell and Zoe Vendittosi. And it is about the historical witches of Scotland. They're on a massive campaign to have historical witches officially posthumously pardoned and a memorial erected to them, and it has really caught the Scottish imagination and beyond. Towns all over Scotland are now campaigning to have their own witches pardoned. They are also incredibly entertaining live.
Excellent. Susan Pym, thank you so much for bringing all the books into the studio, and we wish you all the best for next week. And thanks to my panellist Isabel Hilton and our producer and studio engineer Mariella Bevan. Monocle on Saturdays, back at the same time next weekend. But for now, though, from me, Emma Nelson, goodbye. Thanks for listening. Enjoy your Saturday.